Hi there, my name is Matthew, and this interview is a part of SASAH's Alumni Outreach Project, where we reach out to our alumni and try to gauge their experiences about what it's like to be a SASAH student and how this very, I want to say, unique type of learning and engaged kind of teaching has allowed them to further their career or their graduate studies. And today I am joined with Levi. So Levi pursued a double major in SASAH and Sexuality Studies, and they also did scholars electives, and they're also a Rhodes Scholar, so they're doing a whole lot of cool things, and they are studying a master's in women's studies at Oxford right now. How are you, Levi?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. Did I get everything right there? Did I go through everything pretty well?
Almost. It was all almost perfect, other than the fact that I finished the master's in women's studies, and now I've started a master's in the history of science, which is a weird kind of interdisciplinary leap, which like SASAH obviously prepared me for. Yeah, on to my second master's at Oxford, but
Wow.
I'm moving to New York soon.
That is really cool. That's really inspiring. I'm sure a lot of SASAH students will find that so cool too.
Hope so.
So I guess to kind of start off on this interview, I've been asking the very same question just because I feel like it's very popular. You know, SASAH is a very new program. There isn't really much else like it, and students coming into it are probably very kind of like, what is this? Like, what am I doing? So seeing as you've graduated, you of all people have a better grasp. So in your own words, describe to us what is SASAH.
That was a question that I asked myself and that my cohort asked ourselves throughout the 4 years of our time in SASAH. So it's definitely not a new question, and it's not a new feeling to not be able to express a really clear answer about what SASAH is.
Yeah.
And I think for me, at least in terms of my experience of SASAH, that is what it became for me. It became something that could feel uncomfortable in its uncertainty, but that forced you to continually ask yourself what you were doing. And I think that a lot of other programs allow you to be comfortable in a way that doesn't always serve you after you graduate. And the question, I think SASAH can be defined by the question, what is SASAH? And I think if we ever arrive at a comfortable answer for that, it will take something away from the program. But it's definitely, I'd say, a 4-year process where you're exposed to vastly different methods of working through the world, and where you will continually be called to question things, sometimes like the authority of what you're learning, and sometimes your own position and yourself. So I think that's the clearest answer I can give to that.
I think that was pretty good actually, and I love what you said about if we can't arrive at a clear answer, then we're kind of doing something wrong, because I think the beauty of SASAH is that it can really kind of be anything that you want it to be, pretty much. Would you agree? Yeah. So kind of bouncing off of the whole interdisciplinary aspect of SASAH and it being molded to whatever your dreams are, I guess beyond that, what do you think really attracted you to the program? Like, drew you in really?
Yeah, this one for me, so I was only the second cohort who came in. So it was even newer when I was doing my kind of welcome day or whatever, the open house at Western.
Yeah, open house.
And I really did not want to go to Western. And this is a story that I tell a lot. Like, Western's great as a school. I wanted to leave London. Like, I wanted to go out and live my big life in Toronto and all of these things. And I was actually planning on going into theater. Because if any of you are from London or living in London, the Grand Theatre down on Richmond Street runs sort of a high school project, and I was really involved with like production theatre and design and things like that. So I was planning on going into that, but I knew I wanted something a little more academic, something that I could really sink my teeth into intellectually. So when I was at this open house, the then director of SASAH, Joel Fathwak, kind of pulled me out of the crowd, and he was like, "Hey, what are you studying? Like, what are you interested in?" And I was like, "Oh, like I really want to do theater, don't want to be here," like that kind of thing. And he was like, "Oh, well, like there's a lot more that you could do with that, and through SASAH, you could also kind of have the opportunity to do hands-on stuff or launch your own theater productions, which is something that like someone in my cohort did, and all of these other things." And I thought, you know, like maybe there's something here, and I think that the glimmer of openness kind of attracted me to it initially, the idea that I could still pursue an education where there were a lot of open ends, without tying myself down to one career path, or anything like that. And I had this idea that I was going to come into SASAH and do all of this theater stuff. I didn't end up doing any of that, but it's because I discovered so many other things that I was interested in that I just got pulled away from it quite organically, and in a really fun way. So I think my kind of gamble paid off in terms of choosing SASAH, though not in the way that I expected, which is often the case.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I feel that's extremely relatable because I remember, I think this year I was also kind of volunteering for open house, and I feel like it's very SASA like to just pull students to our booth and just be like, hey, like, what are you studying? And just
Yeah,
give them
exactly.
responses because
Yeah.
then, oh, sorry, I don't mean to cut you.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna say I volunteered at the open houses every year that I was a SASA student, and I think like that's you can really tell when someone's like gonna kind of get into the program and choose to come to Western,
Yeah.
because you can tell you can spin anyone's like interest to be like this could fit with SASA, and you either see them be like that sounds too complicated, or you see them be like oh my god,
Yeah,
I could do
yeah,
this.
definitely. Yeah, no, because I kind of love talking with prospective students like that, and as you said, spinning it to what they to see that their interest can really mold into that, and that through SASA they can develop so much more interest like you did. So yeah, I love that kind of aspect of open house with SASA. But anyway, kind of beyond that, so I was wondering, what do you feel like how do you think SASA has prepared you for your studies at Oxford, whether that be any specific courses or skills, or just how has SASA made you into the student that you think is prepared and ready for your Oxford Masters?
I could probably go on about the academic aspect of it for quite a long time, but that's also specific to someone who chose to go on in the humanities, like doing 2 degrees in the humanities. So SASA prepared me for that academically very well because it exposed me to things that like, in the kind of the specificity of a typical Western class, you might not be exposed to in relation to each other. Uh, like reading different philosophers alongside each other that you might not think go together and things like that, and kind of being able to trace through that intellectual history. But also it has prepared me, it did prepare me, I think, by virtue of the content of what you're doing in SASA being so wildly different all the time, to be incredibly adaptable to different circumstances and to be able to jump into conversations that, while it might not be in your discipline, you can kind of like fly by the seat of your pants by having a little bit of grounding in that subject and having an understanding of the broader picture of why you learned the things that you learned, which is like I was saying earlier, like because SASA forces you to question why you're doing what you're doing so much. I think I ended up with a much clearer picture, or at least like a personal conviction about why I was doing what I was doing. And that has definitely like really helped me in more competitive graduate environments and in like speaking publicly about things that sometimes make me nervous to speak about publicly.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Kind of bouncing off of that, the idea of being able to think critically about things that you perhaps weren't even sure that you'd be able to engage in, and those kind of ideas. So you also did Scholars Electives, and Scholars is a lot like SASA in that sense, that it kind of forces you to engage a lot of critical ideas, forces you to kind of do a lot of interdisciplinary work. So I was wondering if you could help us kind of find that line of demarcation between the differences of SASA and Scholars Electives.
Yeah, for sure. I think to start off, I'm really glad that I did both, and they were both very different experiences for me that ended up feeding into each other at the end. But basically, Scholars being the sort of opportunity, you have your first year like seminar and your capstone seminar, but in the middle, you're really doing your own research with kind of a supervisor that you choose and you work with individually. And then through SASA, obviously, like SASA's structure is different, and I found it more focused on the cohort. But something that was interesting for me, like being a scholars student, this really came to fruition in my 4th year. being a scholar student through second and third year was great for me because I realized that I did want to do academic work, which isn't the case for everybody, but it allowed me to produce like 2 full-length theses with academics who I really respected and who I learned a ton from and who are still my mentors now. And but the difference, I think, even though I did some of that in SASAH as well, is that with scholars as a humanities student, there weren't as many of us as there were science students, at least in my scholars electives cohort. I found that it was a room full of people who didn't necessarily share not only my perspective, but my kind of background and context and assumptions. So to come into, because I majored in sexuality studies, but my specialty is actually transgender studies, which is a bit narrower and is obviously like something that some people have trouble engaging with. So when I was bringing that research to scholars, I found that I was speaking to a room full of people whose instinct was not to understand and engage as generously as my SASAH cohort. And that taught me a ton about how to speak about the importance of academic work, of work in the humanities, of this kind of like, I don't know, socially aware work. In a way that connects to all audiences, and it challenged me in that sense as a researcher. SASAH challenged me in a different sense because in SASAH, it was a cohort of humanities students who, for the most part, were willing to engage generously and were willing to challenge me kind of on my own ground with a bit more understanding of what I was talking about and why I was doing what I was doing. So one challenged me because it didn't necessarily feel like my community, but it felt like the a microcosm of the broader world that I had to engage in as a researcher. And SASAH challenged me because it did feel like my community and a group of people who can kind of push me to do better. So that's kind of like an impressionistic view of them. But I'd say like scholars, if you know you want to do research, or if you know you want to come out with like a publishable paper and some really good relationships with some of the professors, it's invaluable for that. SASAH, you can do that as your 4th year project, which is also what I did, like independent research with a supervisor, but that felt very much more community driven. So I'd say that it's a more non-traditional approach. Hopefully that is helpful.
No, yeah, that was really well said. Yeah, because I'm a scholar student as well, and I feel like you really summed that up really well. I didn't even think about it before you said it, but yeah, I think scholars is definitely, as you said, a microcosm of the broader like society. Because I mean, there are students that are from all different faculties, from all different backgrounds. While I think SASAH, we're a lot more similar because we're all arts and humanities students, and we have a lot of the same interests. So yeah, I think. Yeah, no, that was really well said.
Yeah, and I think SASAH students have a lot to add to scholars cohorts. So I hope there's still overlap, and I hope that it keeps growing.
Yeah, me too, definitely. So kind of moving on, we're almost getting closer to the end, but before I ask you kind of the final question, I was wondering, what is your favorite aspect about SASAH?
I think this answer has changed for me the further away from SASAH that I get. But I think thinking back on it now, my favorite aspect was I'll say the social aspect, and I'm not kind of like talking about friendships, but like spaces like the SASAH room where you can go and like do your homework and commiserate with other SASAH students about the homework and like all of these other things, but also like learn how to like process different parts of life and bring conversations to people. But then also things like I ran like a little like writing critique group for most of the time that I was there that we called Creativity, and we just like had tea and shared each other's or like listened to each other's poetry and stuff like that. And I think SASAH being an anchor for that kind of thing, looking back on it, is something that I haven't had in later experiences, and which was more valuable than I even realized. Though my other favorite aspect was definitely like the theory and criticism course in second year, but just because I learned that I loved theory and criticism, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but is definitely mine.
Yeah, no, I love that for sure. The social aspect is one of the huge advantages of SASAH. Every time I don't want to say marketing SASAH, but telling people about SASAH, basically, I always mention how after classes, because most of us live in Ontario Hall in the community in first year, and after class we would all walk in like a little herd from class to O Hall. So yeah, no, I completely get that social aspect is huge. So massive. But yeah, I guess my final question for you would be to any kind of current or future SASAH students that may be watching this and maybe they're on the fence or they don't really know what to do right now. I would say, what do you think could be your one piece of advice to them?
I think I'm not going to keep myself to one piece of advice.
Or do as many as you want.
I think I used to give a particular piece of advice to SASAH students, and it was the program is going to give you as much as you put into it. If you're in a place in your life where you feel like you have a lot to put into it, then it will give it back tenfold. Through the way that it's set up, through the kind of care that it attracts in the people who run it and things like this. But I also, like, since I've been reflecting on it a little more, I also think that a second piece of advice that I'd add, or a kind of caveat to that, is that it's okay, and it is actually often, maybe sometimes, a good thing to be really frustrated with your education and to feel like you need to push back on it. Like, I feel like I said this a bit earlier, but if you're not pushing back on what you're doing, then it's probably not challenging you enough to develop you into the kind of person that you're going to need to be to tackle the issues that you like want to tackle in the world. And I say that because, like, I think in my cohort and in a lot of the early cohorts of SASAH that there will be, I think it can feel like just like, yeah, like sometimes it's a shit time to have to manage not only motivating yourself through a university degree, but then also taking on a lot of the responsibility for guiding yourself through education when, like, we don't know anything. Like, we're literally in our 20s, like, you know? But, like, there's so much value in that. And I think, like, that's something that really ended up setting me apart from my peers, like, after the fact, is that having been a part of difficult conversations and frustrating moments with my peers and with my professors, and being committed to, like, being in a classroom, spending the time working through those moments towards some sort of resolution has given me, like, experience that makes it so much more easy for me to speak in those moments in the real world, for lack of a better term. So I just say that, like, if there is a way, like, to see value in that or to hang on through that, there's a lot to be gained from it, and I'm so glad that I was a part of the program.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, I guess that concludes our interview. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule right now. I know it's kind of quarantine, but also there's so much happening in the world right now that I kind of don't want to address, but I mean, it's a pretty crazy time. So thank you so much for taking just a time out of your day to talk to me. I really appreciate that.
For taking on the impetus to set all of this up. It's something, and I wish that we'd done it in my year.
Yeah, no, I definitely, because I think SASAH students being able to see you and hear your voice and hear your experiences, I think it'll really mean a lot to them, and it will connect a lot more, I believe.
I hope so.
So yeah, if any SASAH student might be watching this and they're like, oh my God, I love Levi, how do I contact them? How can I get to you?
Good question. I'm not a huge social media person, so you may not find me there, but you can email me anytime, and, like, I'm always happy to hear from SASAH students. My email is lcrhord, like LCR Hord, at hotmail.com. And people somehow also have been finding me on LinkedIn. So, I mean, like, I get the notification on my phone. I'm not a LinkedIn person, but if you're going to message me on LinkedIn, I'm also there.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, and
No problem.
have a great day.